Welcome to Chautauqua People. I'm John V. My guest is Jared Jacobson, who serves as choir director and organist at Chautauqua Institution. Jared is the son of a Missionary Alliance pastor. He grew up in Girard, Pennsylvania, 53 miles south of the institution, and spent childhood summers on the grounds. He graduated from Westminster College in Pennsylvania and earned a master's degree from the University of Arizona and did additional graduate work there. He fulfilled a lifelong ambition when he was appointed as the institution's organist in 1996. During the off-season, he is the choir director and organist at First Lutheran Church in downtown San Diego, California, and teaches at the Bishop School, a college prep 6th to 8th grade powerhouse in theater, music, and dance. Jared, how did your parents make their way to Chautauqua?
Well, we don't know, is the honest answer. They took that secret to the grave with them. Growing up so close to the institution, they must have known about it and they must have known people there. But as far as I've been able to determine, they never visited the place before we went the first time in 1954.
Really? And then you came regularly from 1954?
Every summer since.
And what were your primary activities here during childhood?
Well, I came to study piano, and so that was the big thing. I went to boys' club for a while until the time I needed to practice cut into the time at boys' club. But I made my share of lanyards and things there. I auditioned with a bunch of singing kids at the boys' club to sing in the opera Carmen in Norton Hall with a Metropolitan Opera star, so that was kind of an inadvertent bonus of going to boys' club. But my world here was piano.
Got it. Now, I understand that you were part of a family of 3 children.
That's right.
While you were playing piano, what were your siblings doing?
My sister was going to girls' club, and my brother went to boys' club for a while, but then he got interested in the outdoor sports nature of Chautauqua. And the magic of that place, as almost everybody in the area knows, it's got a little bit of something for everybody. Even if you just want to go and sit on a porch and read a book, it's a great way to spend a summer.
Right. Now, you then spent your summers here, and you went off at age 17, 18 to college.
Went to college, where the college that my parents had graduated from and where they were married in 1943. My sister and I ended up at Westminster College in New Wilmington, Pennsylvania. And my brother, the renegade, went to Penn State, but we later forgave him for that.
Okay. didn't excommunicate him or something? No. And what were your activities during the summers here at Chautauqua in your college years?
Well, I came up through the ranks as a piano student, and then I began to function as a teaching assistant for some of the younger students. And then gradually took over more responsibilities around the edges of Ozan Marsh and Patricia Bankman's schedule, because we had a lot of kids doing piano, sometimes as many as 65 piano students packed into a 7-week teaching season. And then when Mrs. Marsh passed away, Mr. Marsh asked me if I would take over her spot as his colleague. So I began to do the things that she had specialized in teaching, which was concerto, piano concerto music and 2-piano repertoire. And then together he and I developed a class we called The Science of Learning How to Practice. And then we shared concerts where we would talk about pieces and our interpretation of them, which were in the mornings twice a week, and then 3 times a week in the evening. We would invite students in to play, and we would try to critique what they were doing gently but firmly, and always with a kind of positive attitude. I sort of specialized in French music, and Mr. Marsh specialized in German music, and so it was a happy match all the way around.
Great. How many years did you do that?
I don't even know. I started as a kid in 1954, and the last summer I taught as a piano teacher here was 1985.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. 31 years.
So it was just what we always did in the summer was to come to Chautauqua, and what I always did was go to Sherwood Studio and hang out.
Okay. Now, what were your activities after the end of the teaching, before you became the organist and choir organist?
Well, I had the luxury of experiencing Chautauqua in a totally different way. I became a tourist. And I've always been passionate about reading books, especially from the Smith Library on the grounds. So I would check out a whole bunch of books and sit on a porch and read them, and sometimes go down to the hotel, Athenaeum Hotel, and sit on their porch. But there's always stuff to do at Chautauqua if you're oriented toward music. So I loved going to rehearsals, because the beauty of Chautauqua with the outdoor nature of the facilities is you can wander in and wander out at will as long as you do it quietly. And I love watching the process of music being prepared to be performed by other people. It was fascinating after being so driven to practice the piano and teach it for so many years to just be a consumer of Chautauqua. But there was something kind of missing to that. So I was sort of waiting to see what the next step would be.
Right. Now, tell me about the process by which you became the organist.
Well, it was something I always wanted to do, and even as a little kid, I would escape on Sunday mornings from Children's Church in Hurlbut Church and go over and listen to the music and the choral music and the preaching in the amphitheater. And then, as a teenager, I was in the amphitheater full-time for worship. I lucked out because I grew up listening to the greatest preachers in the English language, and among the other offerings there, that really resonated with me. The choral music there has always been, you know, big barn burner works that you can't do in smaller settings in small churches. And it was the kind of choral music we were doing at Westminster in the chapel choir. So those two parts of my world kind of fit in, and the umbrella over it all was the Massey organ, which thrilled me to the core as a little boy, and it thrilled me to the core as an adult. I was lucky because I had started playing the organ at 13 in addition to the piano, and by the time I was in high school, I felt comfortable enough, and the organist at Chautauqua felt comfortable enough to let me play the occasional postlude at the end of a Sunday service. Doris Eicher, who was one of my favorite of all of my predecessors, did not like to play for Old First Night because you have to play a lot of music and it goes by very fast, little bits of this and that. It made perfect sense to me because I grew up in Chautauqua, so I already knew how to sing on Chautauqua for the Boys and Girls Club and a lot of the other pieces. So she always let me play the Old First Night celebrations and occasional postludes. When we got to the point where the organ at Chautauqua was really ailing in the late 1980s, I was trying to work kind of quietly behind the scenes to energize some effort to restore it, or at least stabilize it. And I was lucky because in those days, the chairman of the Board of Trustees had a daughter who was one of my piano students. So I would go over to their house late at night after all the programming, and he would mix up a big pitcher of martinis, and we would sit and say, well, what are we going to do about the Massey organ? Never realizing that I would ever end up playing it, but I just wanted to somehow be instrumental in helping to preserve it.
Can we go back a little bit?
Sure.
And tell me a little bit about the history of that organ, where it came from, and times it's been remodeled.
It was built in 1907, started design in 1906. The amphitheater was built, that version of the amphitheater was built in 1893, and it contained a niche behind the stage for a small organ that was in the original amphitheater that they outgrew within the first 11 years of its building. And then by 1906, pretty much everybody had decided that the smaller organ that had come across from the old building was not adequate to do everything that needed to be done, because it was the primary music resource for the amphitheater programming. There was no symphony, there was no opera. The organ was it. A very generous family from Toronto who were close friends of Lewis Miller because they had ties to farm machinery manufacturing, and that's where Lewis Miller made his fortune, offered a new organ as a memorial to one of their family members, and not only offered the money for the organ, but they said, we will pay for remodeling the amphitheater. So after the season in 1906, they paid to have the whole area behind the stage blasted out and a huge organ case built out of brick and stone that went all the way down into the ground, foundation for where the organ fan, the organ blowers are. And then a 4-story house to house a very large concert organ. And then the family, whose name was Massey, put together a consortium of organ dreamers, performers and builders, and basically a blank check, and said, we have this fantastic building in Western New York, and we want you to build an organ for it and build everything you think you would need for it to be the centerpiece of the Chautauqua programming. They resurrected the name of a church organ company in Woodstock, Ontario. So for decades, everybody said it was the Warren Church Organ in Chautauqua Institution. But with the advent of the internet, I could do a lot more research than anybody had been able to do. And I realized there was no Warren Organ Company still in existence in 1906. But a lot of people who were associated with it were still around. And ironically, Erie, Pennsylvania, which is just 40-some miles from here, had been a center for organ building for 150 years. And some of the world's largest manufacturers of organ components lived in Erie. Craftsmen had retired in Erie who still remembered how to do things about building organs. And the world's greatest manufacturer, the man who manufactured the most interesting reed stops, which were imitative of orchestra instruments like oboes and clarinets and saxophones, lived in Erie. So they tapped all these resources to build this amazing organ with a blank check. And they could build a space in the amphitheater big enough for the organ they dreamed about. There is a lot of evidence that it was finished in great haste in 1907. The target was to get it up and running for Old First Night, which is Chautauqua's birthday party on the first Tuesday in August. So the organ wasn't even finished when it was dedicated, which is not an unusual story. And at the end, they just kind of shoved things in where there was space for them. But it was a grand, grand sound, a very complete organ that could play virtually anything. If it had a particular flavor, it was that it played French cathedral music extremely well. And the amphitheater building had ideal acoustics for the organ. The organ sat at the sort of above the stage, and the organ traveled along the curved ceiling of the amphitheater, and then that curves would send the sound down into the seats, which were all wood, and then it would start rocketing around because sound travels in straight lines the way light does. And the bottom line is it sounded fantastic in the amphitheater. And this was a building that was built in the days before PA systems. So it was built for people trained in elocution who spoke very slowly and with extremely good diction to be heard from the amphitheater stage all the way out to the ends. It was a risk to build a hall that seated 5,000 people in the middle of the woods and have it work at all, and it did, kind of accidentally. So the organ has been the centerpiece for that, and then gradually the winters began to take their toll because there's no climate control, and the organ was designed to freeze down in the winter and then thaw out in the spring. And by the late 1980s, it was in pretty sorry shape, and the floors that were holding up the pipework inside were beginning to buckle. The tall pedal pipes, some of which were 32 feet tall, were leaning over and holding each other up like an Indian teepee. It was in pretty sad shape, and the original 1906 lighting was hanging, hanging bulbs, Edison-era lighting. It was like the black hole of Calcutta inside the organ, and there were snakes, and there were spiders, and there were who knows what. So it was in pretty bad shape, and we waited a very long time to address this, to the point where when they finally decided the institution needed to do something, they called in consultants, and most of the United States organ builders said, you might have waited too long. There's nobody who really can bring this back to life. But there was a father and son team in Erie who had a company that did organ restorations. And they said, they took a look, they took a big gulp, and they said, we can do this. We'll tap all of the people who live in Erie who are retired, who remember how to build and service organs. And we will do what the institution wanted, which was to stabilize it in time and to restore it to its former glory, and to make a few judicious changes to reverse the things that were done in haste in 1907 to get the organ done in time for its dedication. So they did it all between the end of the season, the last Sunday in August in 1991. By the first Sunday in June in 1992, it was all back in place. It was working perfectly, and it sounded fabulous. And they had changed a few things to make it even better than it was. So when you heard it in 1992, it really sounded better than it ever did before. I was asked to come back and do one of the dedication recitals for it. And then I was asked to come back the next year and play with the orchestra. The dream combination for me of the great Chautauqua Symphony, Japanese conductor who loved to conduct organ pieces. And there was a piece that was written for the Wanamaker Store organ in Philadelphia, which is the largest operating organ in the world. It's almost exactly 10 times the size of the Massey organ.
Whoa.
And it's in the heart, an atrium in the center of a great downtown merchandising space. And one of the greatest organists in Europe was commissioned to write a piece for the Philadelphia Orchestra to play with the Wanamaker organ at its dedication. And through a combination of circumstances, the piece never was played in Philadelphia after it was written, and it kind of went into the dustbin because nobody had the resources to do it. It was the perfect piece for Chautauqua, and I had a copy of it because a Belgian friend of mine who was a composer in Tucson, where I went to graduate school, who had moved there when he was in his 20s because his doctors in Europe said he has asthma and he won't live to be 30 years old. But there's this place at the other end of the United States where the air is dry and that might buy him a little more time. When I met him in Tucson, he was in his 80s.
Whoa.
And teaching and composing, and he loved the piano studio of Ozan Marsh, who was teaching there year-round, where I was doing graduate work. And I was walking by his house one day, which was halfway between my apartment and the music building on campus, and he beckoned me over and he said, "I have a piece for you," and he pulled this out of the drawer. He said, "You'll use this someday." I don't know where. And it was the Organ and Orchestra Concerto. That was the piece written for Wanamakers that never got played there. So anyway, I got to play that in 1994. And I got a very good review in the paper, which was nice. And the reviewer said, there isn't anybody in this world who understands this organ better than Jared Jacobson. So 2 years later, when they were ready to look for an organist, somebody remembered that review and contacted me and said, "Would you like this job?" And so I tried very hard not to shout, "Yes, yes, yes, yes." And I said, "Well, I might think about it." So, of course, it was a done deal. But I had to wait for all those planets to kind of line up for this to happen for me. So I now have the job I always wanted when I was a little kid. And I was trained to be a concert pianist, but there are not a whole lot of jobs for those. But there were church jobs, and I got interested in playing for churches. And it's like super church at Chautauqua. I love more than anything else to help people sing and to help them pray and worship. And at Chautauqua, I get the chance to do all of that for amazing people on the staff in the religion department. The directors I've worked with have been fantastic people. And now those great preachers in the English language that I grew up listening to, I'm now helping to invite the greatest preachers now in the English language from all over the world to come and preach at Chautauqua. My job is to make the Sunday services like jewelry setting for them in the morning so that the sermon is the precious gem. And in the evening, I have the freedom to do anything I want to do to help people sing, whether it's my choirs or whether it's the congregation, and to do organ music and to continue the tradition there of opening the evening services and closing them with the same hymns they've been doing every Sunday since the early 1900s. And Largo, which is played every Sunday night since the organ was dedicated in 1907.
All right. Let's talk a little more about the organ. What is the off-season protocol for the organ?
There are the organ's in this case, and on the front of it, there are 3 huge steel doors, like roll-top doors on a desk. Until last year, they were cranked by hand. And I still have one of the massive cranks that's about this long, made out of cast iron, forged in a blacksmith shop somewhere here in Chautauqua County in 1907. So now we have electric motors, finally. I just turn a key and push a button, and these huge doors come down after the first frost, which in the last several years has been about the middle of October. Mm-hmm. And then the organ freezes down kind of gently with the rest of Chautauqua. And organs are pretty happy if you leave them alone. We do much more damage to organs around here in the winter in churches by winding the heat up on Sunday morning to 75 and then turning it back down to 50. Or in Florida, winding the air conditioning up, or down to 72 and then letting it go back up to 85. Mm-hmm. The Chautauqua organ goes to sleep. It was built like a battleship originally. Everything that in a normal organ is this thick, in the Chautauqua organ is that thick. It was rebuilt that way in 1991 by the Fisher brothers, father and son. They used all new wooden work for the organ pipes. Are all supported on a wooden frame, and it's made out of yellow poplar wood, which is native to this part of New York. It's a very long-grained wood with few knot holes, and it changes shape very little when it gets cold or when it gets warm. Everything expands when it gets warm, and it shrinks when it gets cold. They also braced their new framework into the amphitheater structure itself, the old amphitheater, so that the amphitheater and the organ became one instrument. When we rebuilt the amphitheater a year ago, that was a challenge to figure out what to do with the organ. And we finally decided that it had been built so carefully and so well and braced so beautifully that all they had to do was close it up and cover the front of it with Tyvek, which is a thick plastic insulating material. And then they carefully took the whole building down around it. And so no blasting was involved. It was all done by hand. And then there were 6 weeks where the organ sat in a smoking crater that used to be the amphitheater, all by itself, like one of those totemic objects in 2001 Space Odyssey that would appear in pivotal moments in human history. This was the pivotal moment in my history at Chautauqua, to see on TV in San Diego pictures of the amphitheater site and the Massey organ standing all by itself. And then they built a brand new building around it, with much larger backstage area, which we were desperate to have more facilities, and we were out of everything, out of plumbing, out of lighting, out of electricity, out of everything. Storage. The choir for 57 years rehearsed in a corridor that was big enough for about 30 people, and I would jam 55 or 60 people in for my daily choir. The Chautauqua choir couldn't fit anywhere but the choir loft. But there wasn't any time to do that except on Sunday mornings with the scheduling. So now we have all kinds of backstage facilities, a stage that's deeper into the ground, but the organ is still the centerpiece, and my big worry was the acoustics.
Right.
And I just really sweated bullets over the acoustics of the new building, because it's not a well understood science. And there have been a lot of examples where, with the best intentions in the world, halls have been built with organs in them, and they turned out to be like disastrous, like playing in a box of Kleenex. So I said we need a curved ceiling. What we have now just needs to be larger in the new building. We need the same kind of materials, and then we need just to trust the process. But I didn't have any way of knowing what it was going to sound like. I was here in April during the construction. I heard a guy drop a box of tools in the amphitheater when it was just a shell, and it sounded pretty good. So I thought, well, maybe we might have pulled this off. And then when I came back in June last year, we couldn't get in yet because it was still a hard hat site, and all the seats were in place, the benches. And I heard a guy drop another box of tools, and it sounded even better. So finally, the day before the season, the afternoon of the Jamestown High School graduation, which always happens there, I got a chance to play the organ. And the construction crew had no idea what was in that big box that they were building around. They thought, I think it was a storeroom of some sort. They had no clue it was a musical instrument. So when we rolled the doors up and I played the first couple of chords, I burst into tears because it sounded so good. Not just the same, not just better, twice as good as it was before. And their jaws dropped to the ground. There were 1,000 guys working on that site to get it finished for the opening of the season. They all whipped out their smartphones and took pictures and took sound, because they had no idea they were building a house for a musical instrument.
Right.
So,
now, what's the current status of the organ today?
well, we had, in our $41.9 million building, we had a water leak right after Christmas, and it picked exactly the wrong spot to leak. It leaked right on top of the control desk, which is the mechanism by which you control the instruments. All of the pipework was intact and stayed dry throughout the whole process of building and then for the first winter. But the water that came through pretty much ruined the organ console, because it got into the keyboards, which were faced with ivory from 1972. Because ivory is the most effective surface to play on for piano keys or organ keys. And all of the ivories began to, as the water dried them out, they began to curl up and gnarl, so they were a total loss. And then the water continued taking glue with it through the roll top and went and started splashing everywhere. So the console was pretty much of a mess. The shell was salvageable, and some of the mechanisms were salvageable, but the keys were a total loss. So the best maker of organ keyboards in the world is in England, and they took on the challenge of building new keyboards for me. Can't have ivory anymore, but I can have bone, so they're going to be covered with calf's bone. The kind of ebony for the black keys that you get these days always has little flecks of brown in it because ebony has evolved as a wood. So I went with African blackwood, which is utterly, midnight black, and will stay that way without refinishing. We had arranged to ship the frameworks for the old destroyed keyboards to England. They said if we get them by the middle of January, we'll get them back to you as best we can before the season starts in June. I got word last week, a week ago, Thursday, as I was getting ready to come up here, that they were a little behind and they weren't going to be able to ship the keyboards until the 25th, which is the day after we opened this 2018 season. And then last Friday in the morning, we got word the keyboards were in the air on the way from England to the United States to Erie International Airport, which, because it's international, has a customs agent who's a representative of the federal government, who had expedited the shipping of the old frames back to them. And then all of a sudden they were diverted to Memphis, Tennessee, which is where they're sitting as you and I are talking right now. And they're tied up in U.S. Customs for reasons we don't quite understand. So they may be here by tomorrow night, they may be here by the middle of this week. But where the organ console lives now in the new amphitheater, it has its own huge room right off stage that's soundproof, so they can work in there if they have to all night long to get everything.
Can we see what that
hooked up.
looks like?
Yes, we can. I took a picture today of the console. They sent us 2 loaner keyboards from Texas. And so they slotted those in. It normally has 4 keyboards for the hands and another keyboard for the feet. The foot keyboard was rebuilt, and it's not in this picture that I took just a couple of hours ago. But if I have to, we could probably use the console. It would be a little odd to have this hole in the middle. Our house manager has suggested I go out and buy an aquarium to go with the water theme of the damage. But it's possible that they will get the new keyboards fit into that and everything put together. So I've got my fingers and every digit I have crossed so that this will work. And the organ guys did a miracle to get it all up and running in 1992. I have every confidence that they will work their magic, and my job is to make music on whatever they hand me. So if I have to, I'll just roll out a piano, and it's not the worst in the amphitheater because we have 2 concert caliber Steinways. Each is worth about $150,000, and they're in perfect tune. So if I have to, I'll just use that. I roll with the punches. That's my job.
Let me ask you a question, slightly different topic. We can switch. Tell me a little bit about what you do in San Diego, the church and the school.
Well, I work for as the music director for a small Lutheran church. It's Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, ELCA. That has about 150 members. It's right in the heart of San Diego City proper. We're almost the last church to be downtown because all the other big old churches are fugitives into the suburbs. We're the oldest Protestant congregation in San Diego, but since 1959 we have abandoned a termite-ridden all-wooden structure about a block from where we are now and built the first phase of a large church complex. And the minister who was in charge of all of this died of pancreatic cancer 3 weeks after he was diagnosed, and the church kind of went into a tailspin. So all they got finished was a gymnatorium and 3 classrooms and a couple of offices and a parking lot. And that's what the church has been worshiping in ever since. But because they didn't want to leave downtown, they decided to start an outreach to homeless people. It started with baking bread 1 day a week and inviting people in for bread and a cup of coffee. And then they realized the need was really for hot meals. So we started a hot meal program 2 days a week. And then a doctor who was actually an Orthodox Jewish ER doctor who was teaching at a medical school right up the street from us in San Diego said, I'd like to bring some students down because they maybe could minister to these people while they're waiting for the meals to be served. And then she got some funding from both her university and from the government to create a free clinic. And next thing you know, we had 12 doctors coming down 1 night a week and seeing patients. They were seeing a lot of people with tooth problems, so they cajoled a dental school into sending people down and creating a dental clinic on our little corner of the world. And then they realized that there was a need for legal aid for people, and there was a law school right up the street. And they were the last to fall for this, because they said, well, you know, there's all these liability issues. And we said, well, you're a law school, so you need to be able to figure this out. So they started a free clinic. And then the traditional docs brought an acupuncture clinic, which is very hands-on, and that became very popular with the people who lived in retirement complexes downtown. So we have 12-step groups that meet there. So in addition to worship on Sundays, we have the church building in use almost 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
It's a major service component, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an amazing outreach, and it's all done with volunteer help and very little funding from the outside. And then the other side of my life there is to teach in this college prep school that, actually I'm going to correct a tiny little thing that you said, it's 6th through 12th grade.
Okay.
And it was started in 1909. It's in La Jolla, which is a seaside suburb of San Diego. When it was started in 1909 as a girls' boarding school, La Jolla was a down-and-out artist colony with people in little shacks sort of hugging the ocean and painting and weaving. And now La Jolla is one of the great financial centers of the United States, and there's also a great research institution building program there. The Scripps Institute of Oceanography is based there. The University of California, San Diego campus is in La Jolla. It's divided into 5 colleges that are all into research. We have research into atomic fusion. We have medical research going on, and all in this beautiful little seaside community, the heart of which is my little school, which is now co-ed and not a boarding school. And it's got very high caliber college prep studies for the idea is to get your kid into Harvard or Stanford, you send them to the Bishop School. But we realized early on, the head of the school said, you know, you need more than just the heavy duty academics. And his wife was a school music teacher, so she whispered into his ear, well, honey, you know, you need the performing arts. So he took a risk and he hired a theater teacher, and then she brought in a music teacher, and then they brought in a dance teacher. So now, 30 years later, I'm reaping the benefits of this by being part of a performing arts team. And we are the safety valve for the kids from their intense studies.
Great.
And we have made it cool for award-winning football players to also be on the stage and dancing and singing in a musical. And we have made it cool for dancers to also be Olympic equestrians. And we have virtually all of our kids go to college. Last year, one girl did not go to college. She went right into the diplomatic corps, went from La Jolla to Geneva, Switzerland to be trained as a diplomat. And we had another girl who went into culinary school and has now, 3 years later, opened her own chain of restaurants. So it's an amazing place to be. I grew up being driven to be a concert pianist. So I never played a Broadway show. I never played a dance rehearsal. And now I get to do all of the above. I'm kind of the grand old man of the faculty because I'm 69 years old now. And the kids say, oh, Mr. Terry, you're so smart. And I say, no, I know a tiny little bit about a lot of different things. So the kids have decided I should be a perfect contestant for Jeopardy. But these kids come in not knowing who Bob Hope and Lucille Ball were, not knowing who Bob Hope was, not knowing much that wasn't book learning about history. And so and I've done a lot of things, and through Chautauqua learned a lot of things about a lot of people. So I can try out things at my school in our chapel program and bring them here and use them for sacred song services on Sunday nights. I can try out things here, take them home and do them there. But it is like being a double agent. And so I have 2 worlds. I have 2 wardrobes and 2 of pretty much everything except 1 dog and a laptop and an iPad and a smartphone. But I have chargers on both coasts, and I have music libraries on both coasts. We even have 2 sets of dog dishes. The same
If you need a
dishes
second
in 2
dog,
places.
give a choice of color.
So my dog and I fly back and forth with a barrel full of music, and pretty much the rest of it coming here is like putting on comfy old clothes. Within 2 minutes of coming onto the grounds, I feel like I'm home.
Great.
And
Great.
it's an amazing place.
Jared, we are about out of time. What else do you wish to share?
If you've never been to Chautauqua, and I know there are people who will be seeing this who have never been, come see it. On Sundays, it's a free day. You can come, you can go to church, or you can just go sit on the beach. You can sail a boat, you can play shuffleboard, you can play, there's 2 amazingly good 18-hole golf courses that are part of us across the road. Just come and see who we are, taste what we do there, because there's really something for everyone. There are other places you can go for individual things that are better than we do them, for orchestra, for dance, or ballet, or theater. But there's no place in the world that has the mix of programming that Chautauqua does. And you can find courses to study for anything you can imagine. If you're an expert in poison mushrooms, come teach a course in it and show us, how to tell the difference. There's, lip reading for people over 75. There's investment planning for kids in preschool. There's everything you can imagine at Chautauqua. So come see.
And when you come on Sunday, stay for the worship service and listen to some terrific organists play Largo at the end.
And come talk to me afterwards. I'm very approachable. Every other Sunday I do children's organ programs where I show them how it works, and then I put the little kids on the bench and say, play. And just make noise, because somebody let me do that when I was 5, and now I'm the Chautauqua organist. So
that's terrific. This has been wonderful.
Oh,
We're
thanks.
way out of time. We're over our scheduled time. And Chris Burt, who's here, always indulges me when we have a great conversation like this.
Well, it's your fault because you're easy to talk to.
No, we had a good prep today. So thank you very much. This has been Chautauqua People. My guest has been Jared Jacobson. And please do come as he suggests and take a look at Chautauqua. Start on a Sunday.